Engineers by engineers. And this week, like I have with me Saurav, and we're going to be talking about OIDC. We'll get started in a minute, right? So until then, you can ask, feel free to ask questions on just post them on the LinkedIn comment box or, go to our community Slack, yugabyte.com/Slack, and you can ask questions there too. So, hey, thanks a lot, Saurav, for, making the time. I think it's late for you, right? Like, where are you based out of?
Yeah. Hi, folks. I'm based out of India, Hyderabad in India.
Awesome. Fantastic. So maybe you can do a very short intro and we can get things going.
Sure. So yeah, hi. I'm Saurav. I've been working at Yugabyte for the past 1.5 years. I primarily have been working on change data capture and a bunch of other YSQL features. One of them is OIDC. Before that, I was working at Google for 2 years, solving some payment problems. That's about me.
Awesome. Fantastic. So maybe let's dive right in. So OIDC authentication. I hear a lot about it that, it's the modern way, it's the new hotness. So maybe tell us what you have, Sarah. Let's jump right in.
Sure. So as Karthik said, we'll talk about OIDC authentication, and we'll look at it from the spectrum of Azure AD as the external identity provider. So what is OIDC? So OIDC stands for OpenID Connect. It's an authentication and authorization protocol that is built on top of OAuth 2.0. It is fast becoming the standard for authentication in cloud-native applications. And the reason for that is it allows you to delegate the authentication responsibilities to an external identity provider, in this case, Azure Active Directory. And the key technical point here is that it utilizes JSON Web Tokens, short JWTs, for access control. So the communication between your identity provider and your cloud-native application, it happens through JWT, via JWT. So before we jump into YSQL, like OIDC in Postgres, right? So Postgres does not have like a native support for OIDC. There are ways to like get it to work through the pluggable authentication module support, PAM short. But what it needs is that it requires a production-ready, battle-tested PAM module, because we're talking about security here. So you want a production-ready module that has been tested and that is like that supports OIDC. It's difficult to find. For example, I've listed down 3 examples, but none of them I found were like production-ready, I believe. And another challenge with this is it requires manual setup of the module. So you have to go on every node of your Postgres deployment, and you have to configure that. So next up, we'll talk about the use cases. So we have primarily 2 use cases that I want to talk about that we are trying to tackle through OIDC support in YSQL. The first one is if you want to eliminate password management, it's completely. So what I mean by that is if you, as a user, suppose, and this is an example we'll keep coming back to, which is if you're a huge organization and you have hundreds of databases, universes, hundreds of Yugabyte universes, and you have thousands and tens of thousands of employees, each of them has to maintain a password for each of the universe. And it can quickly get out of hand. So how about we just eliminate the password itself and utilize the centralized place where we just maintain one password, and that one password can be used for everything else. And we'll see that. Another use case is how about we just eliminate the user provisioning itself and just use a role or a group-based access control. So what it does is it simplifies the user addition or removal, because you no longer need to provision users in your database universes.
So just to put it out there, this is super critical for high velocity, high speed development in organizations where you want authentication and identity access control, all of that stuff, but also done in more of a CI/CD or infrastructure as code, where like tending towards that, right? Like less manual actions.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah.
We'll talk about these 2 use cases in action, targeting at Azure AD. So we'll talk about first, eliminating the password management. So what I mean by that is you should be able to log in via your web token. So as a user, what you have to do is you have to log into your identity provider, and once you successfully log in with your username and password, you'll receive a token, which includes all of your identity information. And when you want to log into your database to YSQL, you can just provide your JWT as the password. And what your YSQL username can also be different from the corresponding identity provider name. Okay, so we'll see that in action now. I will demo these two scenarios, where the first scenario is when your identity provider username is the same as your YSQL username. And second, when there are differences, and we'll see that there is a little bit extra configuration you have to do to be able to support scenario 2. Okay, so let me switch to actually, before I switch to my terminal, I want to show my Yugabyte deployment. So I'm using a Yugabyte Anywhere deployment here. What I have here is this, to set up any authentication in Yugabyte, you have to set up this G flag called HBA-conf CSV. We'll see that in a later slide also, but just for clarity here, this is my configuration. What you have is one line. The first entry here, what it says is that if we want to allow the Yugabyte user to log in with their password, and I want to do that so that I can create other users that I can show the demo for. And the main thing is your configuration for the JWT, OIDC. So OIDC, we are calling the OIDC authentication as JWT because of its reliance on the token. So there are a bunch of configuration. I'll talk about them later, but roughly here, this is what it is. Okay. So I'll switch to my terminal and I showcase the login. So the first thing we want to do is I want to first log in as my Yugabyte user so that I can create the roles so that I can show you the login. Okay. So I'm pasting this from a separate file that I've already created. This user has a.
So you're just connected to the database right now, and as a user.
Connected, I have SSH to my database node, and I've connected via the Yugabyte user by default. And this user has all the privileges that you need to create other users. So, for instance, like it has it's a super user basically. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll create a user that corresponds to my YSQL. That corresponds to my identity provider user. So that will be create user. I will name the user Saurav, the OIDC dev Saurav. And this is critical because my identity provider user is also named Saurav. Okay. And then I will quit from this terminal. And let me quickly grab a token for this user right. So now I will quit from this and I will just connect to I will try to log in as the OIDC dev Saurav user here. So I'll say tserver bin and I'll try to connect as the OIDC dev Saurav user that I just created. And when prompted for my password, right, I will post my JWT token. And I'll show you the JW token in a minute. So firstly, like you can see that I was able to connect as the OIDC dev Saurav user using my JWT token. So let's see that JWT token in action actually. What does it actually have? Sorry. Let me copy paste this. Right. So this is the token that I actually got from Azure. And what the main thing here is that the name corresponds to my username on the identity provider side, which is Azure. So because my name directly matched with the name I gave to the YSQL user that I created here, this just works. We obviously do a bunch of validation of the token, and I'll talk about them a bit later. But as long as the token is valid and the name corresponds to OIDC dev Saurav, the token is considered valid and we are able to successfully log in.
Right. And there's rules for validity right here, like expiry, all of that stuff is built right into the token, right?
Yes. I'll talk about that, Nikam. So I'll quickly demo the second scenario as well. And in this second scenario, the only difference is that your identity provider user and the YSQL users are different. User names are different. So for that, you need a second piece of config called identconf. And what it is, it's basically a regex translation rule. And what it is saying is that in this case, what it is saying is anyone, so the syntax is the map name, your identity provider username, and your YSQL username. And what we are saying is from the identity provider username, extract out the bit, which is just after OIDC dev underscore, and bind that value to the YSQL user name. So in this case, OIDC underscore dev underscore Saurav just becomes Saurav. OIDC underscore dev underscore Karthik becomes just Karthik. Okay. So that's just a very small translation rule. Apart from this, if you see the map name, right, name map. So to be able to use this map, the config here is the same as what we used in the previous demo, previous scenario. It's just that you have to provide that name of the map that you want to use, the translation rule that you want to use. And so in this way, YSQL will be able to determine that, okay, even though the name in the token is OIDC dev Saurav, but let me translate it to Saurav and then check that Saurav matches the YSQL username Saurav, which it does. So the login will be successful. Okay. So I will demo that as well. Let me connect. I have connected to my second universe where this the universe is configured with this mapping itself. And so the same thing again, we will first have to create the user. So I'll log in through my super user account to create the other user, which is going to be Saurav in this case. So we created that. So as you can see, like Saurav was created. The key thing is I didn't provide any password for this. And so I'll get out of my terminal again. And now I'll try to log in as Saurav. So we'll say the server. When prompted for the password, I will be able to use the same token that I used in my previous scenario, and we're just still able to log in. And we can see that through the con info here. It says that I'm logged in as user Saurav to the database Yugabyte, right? So even though the token is the same, the token is the same token that I used here, the name was effectively translated. So this is how you can, handle like mismatches as well. And because it's a regular expression, it's not hard-coded to a single user, like anyone who matches this pattern will be able to work. In fact, you can have more. So you can even have name map, and you can add another translation rule here, just saying, John Doe is John. If it doesn't match, it will go line by line, and if any one of these matches, it's successful.
The order of priority is the order there.
Yeah, the order. More can be found on our documentation around this syntax. It's just regular expression and normal syntax, but we'll go. Okay. So that's it for this scenario. So we'll talk about the configuration, what I have done. It's pasted here in this slide. So for the first scenario, this is the setup that we have.
Before we go forward, Juan asks a question. Is there any case sensitivity on the name?
Yes. So in YSQL and in PG, in fact, your usernames have to be lowercase. Even if you have an uppercase, it's, I think, automatically converted to lowercase. So yes, there is a case sensitivity here. It won't match if it's not a character to character match, it won't work.
Got it. Fantastic. Okay,
cool. So these are the two scenarios. The first scenario is when you have the same usernames. So let me go over each of these. I'm assuming that there is sufficient familiarity with the first four parameters, but I'll still talk about them. First is host, which is, these are like very common Postgres parameters. These are common for like any authentication method, not just OIDC. You set host to say whether you want whether this authentication method should be applied on when your clients are across on a different node on a different machine. The other option is local, when the client has to actually SSH into your machine and then log in. The next two are the database and your users. So all just means I want to apply this authentication method for all the databases and for all the users. And then the fourth one is, if you're using host, then you can specify on what IP address should the IP address of the client for which this authentication method should be applicable. So here we are accepting all. Okay. The fifth one is the name of the authentication method, which we are calling JWT. And then there are your JWT specific parameters that you have to pass. Primarily, there are four. First is your issuer. So your issuer is your who is actually issuing the token, right? So any token, it has to be issued by someone. And in this example, it's issued by Azure. Effectively by setting the issuer here, what you're saying is, I will only accept a token that is issued by this issuer, whose issuer field is set to this field. Okay. For Azure, it's usually this login microsoftonline.com tenant ID and your /v20. Okay. So even if you have a valid token, but whose issuer is not set to this value, the authentication will fail. Okay. This is the multiple, you can provide multiple, this is a comma separated field. Now, audience. So audiences are just kind of the opposite of issuer, which is for whom is this token intended for? And so I could get a token. So Azure could issue a token for YSQL, but that doesn't mean you should be able to use it to log into some other application, right? So even if the token is valid, if it's everything else is fine, a token issued for one native application should not be used to log into another application. So this is where you can add that check. So you can say, I will only accept token that is issued for my client ID. It's usually the client ID in Azure case, but in other identity providers, it can be something else. The third thing is your key set path. So these issuers and audiences are fine. But if you think about it, like once you get a token from Azure, that token can actually be tampered with, right? So how do we, as a database and as any application, ensure that the token has not been tampered with? Because the whole integrity is reliant on that. So to do that, any token issued by an identity provider is actually signed by a private key held by them. And they usually make the public key available online to be fetched.
To verify, yeah.
To verify the signature, to fetch it and then verify the signature. So this is and that is called a key. So it's usually more than one key. So that's why this is called a JWKS, which stands for JSON Web Key Set. The expectation is that you'll take the key file, you'll take the key and post it into a file, and then provide the key path here. Okay, and actually, so this is for our OSS model, our OSS distribution. But for if you're a customer of Yugabyte anywhere, we have ways to, because you have to create this file on every node of your universe. So to simplify this, the Yugabyte Anywhere UI provides a handy dialog box where you can paste actually I can show it. So this here, right? So when you are configuring JWT authentication, you can actually specify your key set here. Like this. So I mainly copied it from here. This is a public keys. It's completely fine to share. So you can take it from here and then you just paste it here in your key set. Okay. And the last bit is your matching claim key, which is in this case is set to name. And what it is saying is, which field should I look at in the token to identify the user, identify the identity provider user. Okay. In this case, I used name, but as we'll see in a later use case, we can also use roles or anything else to identify and get to solve different use cases. And so right. So that's that's it for scenario one. In scenario two, there are just small differences. The difference here is that you have to have additional translational rules. So for that, you specify the map name, and then you provide another G flag where your entry, you provide the actual entry for the map. Right. So that's it for the configuration of scenario one, of the use case one. I'll switch to use case two now. Yep. So use case two that I want to cover is the role-based or similarly group-based of access control. Okay. So this is the kind of use case I have in mind when I say role-based access control. Okay. So what you have is in your identity provider, you have these example roles. These are just example roles. Suppose you have three roles: test, read-only, test operator, and test admin. And you have a bunch of users in your Active Directory, which are John Doe and Jane Doe. Of course, the assumption is that there will be more users than roles. I mean, that's the whole reason why we do role-based access control. So what ideally should happen is that in this use case, you would only need to provision the users for the roles that correspond to these roles. So you can create a database user that corresponds to the first role, read only, and let's call it DB reader. The second one, same DB operator, and the third one, DB admin. Okay. And once you do all of the setup, and I'll show the setup in a next slide, the intended final goal is that John Doe, because John Doe has this read-only role, he should be able to log in as DB reader, but he should not be able to log in as DB operator and DB admin. Okay. And while Jane Doe, because she has all three roles, she should be able to log in as any of these users. And of course, these users, when they are being provisioned, they would be given, inappropriate access, because just giving the name DB admin doesn't mean anything unless you give them admin privileges, such as dropping database and all. So I'm assuming that those are already done during the provisioning. And because these are just for roles, we assume that there are only going to be a handful of these roles. So even manual provisioning is fine here. Yeah, and so the key advantage here is that if tomorrow John Doe were to leave the organization, right, you do not have to do anything apart from removing them in Azure AD. You do not have any YSQL user corresponding to John Doe, so there's no need for cleanup also. Once they are removed from the organization, they will not be able, once they're removed from Azure AD, they will not be able to get a fresh token. And if they're not able to get a token, they will not be able to log in. So there are no changes. Don't need to go to your hundreds of database universes and actually manually delete them, or when someone is joining, add them. Okay, so I'm just going to demo this use case as well on a Yugabyte Anywhere universe. So I'll show the HBA configure here, and so it's pretty much the same, except that here I'm saying in the matching claim key, I want to look at roles. So instead of just looking at the name, I wanted to look at the roles. And by the way, this can be more than one, right? Roles can be more than one. So this can also this can also point to an array. Okay. And next, I'm also using an Azure AD map and calling a map, which corresponds to the map that I have provided in this second G flag. And here I provided three rules, translation rules. And I've said OIDC test read only is equal to DB reader. So anywhere you see this role, just think that this is the role DB reader, and the same for admin and same for the operator. Okay. So with this setup, I'll show the demo on the. So I've connected to my third universe where this role-based setup is done. I will log into I'll log in as the super user to create these three roles. So I created them. We can see them here. Right. So these three roles have been created in the database. And so now, yeah. So now I will try to log in as DB reader through a user who has just the read-only permissions. Okay. So 1 second, let me fetch the token as well. So it asks me for my password, but in the password, I'll just paste my token and I'll show that token just now as well. So when I used my token, I was able to sign in as DB reader. But if I use this same token to try to log into DB admin, the authentication will fail. Okay. And so let's see this token or the contents of this token. Sorry. The key thing here is that because we configured YSQL to look at the roles key in that matching claim key, it is now looking at the roles and it is finding that this user only has the OIDC test.read-only role. And using the translation rules, it is translating this to the reader role, DB_reader role. So that is why using this token, I was able to log into DB reader user. But because there is no role named OIDC test admin here in this for this user, this token is not usable to log into that as that user. So let's take another example. This time out, I'll use a user who has all the 3 permissions, which was Jane Doe in my example. So just give me a second. Okay, so let me show the token here first. So this is the token for Jane Doe. And the difference here is that she has all these 3 roles: admin, read-only, and operator. So if I go, I'll switch back to my terminal. And now I'll try to log in as DB admin. But this time out, I'll paste the token that was for Jane Doe. And this time out, the authentication was successful because this has the correct permission. I can also log in as DB operator. I mean, it's the same because all 3 of the roles are present. So all of these 3 will be successful. Right. So as I said, the difference here is just that we set a role and we set the map and we gave the contents of the map here by saying this role is this role is this, and operator is this. Like ideally, we could have done some regex magic here to we shouldn't have needed to add these 3. I could have probably added a regex here. But that there was a question before, right, on case. So this would really have to be small case. Like if you have a capital case, there's no other way rather than to specify them individually, because YSQL. And another thing is that your YSQL username cannot contain dot. It's an invalid character. So even because of the uses of that, also we have to specify it like this. We need a regex here. We need a mapping here. Okay. So I think that's
one tangential question as you're going through this, Saurav, is all of the stuff that you demoed or are demoing, is it built into the database?
Yes, it is.
It is built in. You can do it with open source. They just try it out, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. That's all. Yeah, keep going. I think this was a question that came up. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes. The difference between the OSS is that you have to give the path here. So you have to paste the key set that I showed, paste it into a file and provide the path. And if you're using via YB Anywhere, you have a way to just provide it in a UI, and the YB Anywhere will tackle the path or the automation of putting it into a file and providing the path. So that's just a small change, but it's available completely open. And that's all I had actually in this.
Fantastic. So just to remind people, what was the OIDC provider you had used here?
Azure Active Directory.
Azure AD, right? Right, yeah. And in our documentation, I see that we have it with Microsoft Entra. I don't know if that's a different thing or the same thing, but perhaps we could add a OID AD-based example also, because
yeah. So it is the same. It's just that Entra provides you with a bit more ways to configure things. So it provides you with with ability to specify what specific informations you want in the token. But even by default, roles just work fine in this example. This was with a free model of Azure Active Directory. If you have an enterprise license, you can do a bit more on specifying group names and a bunch of that aspect. It simplifies a bit, but kind of the same.
Got it. Got it. Fantastic. Okay. Another question is YBA, YugabyteDB Anywhere, required to use OIDC auth in YSQL? Is it required or it's not? I think you already answered it. I think open source will work. It'll just work anywhere, right?
Yes, yes. It'll just work anywhere. And it's not required to use OIDC in YBA, in YSQL. Like you can use any other authentication method as well, if I understood the question correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Let's see if there are more questions. I think, yeah, if folks have more questions, we are just about on time. Maybe we have time for one more question. Let me see. So, Rakibul, I think answer to your question is everything is built in. You can just try it with the open source. I think most of the others, the LinkedIn's really scrambling these comments, so I have to read each one to make sure there's I didn't miss anyone. But anyway, so thanks a lot, Saurav. That was really a very, very slick demo, very neat integration. And I think like amazing to see the level of automation that's coming into the industry, right? Like, users, roles, everything is being automated, permissions. So it's just amazing. So thank you. And thank you everybody for attending. Thanks for your great questions. You can continue to post questions on LinkedIn. You can join our community Slack. You can see it here, yugabyte.com/Slack. And do start us on GitHub. We love that. And we will see you in a week or two once again and with another topic and another talk. Thanks a lot. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Awesome. So